All rise. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. This Honorable Superior Court for the County of Wake is now open and sitting for the regular dispatch of business. The Honorable G. Brian Collins presiding. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. God save the state in this honorable court. Please be seated.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. Welcome, everybody, to this special ceremonial session of the Wake County Superior Court. I'm very pleased to see that so many of you could make it on this dreary day. It's a great day of celebration of the memories of our colleagues who've gone before us. I want to thank the bar for letting us do it here in a session of open court. I think it's altogether fitting that we honor lawyers in that way. And at this time, I'll recognize the president of the Wake County and 10th Judicial District Bars, Nancy Grace, for some remarks.
Thank you, John. On behalf of the 10th Judicial District, I'd like to welcome all of you here to this memorial session of court. I think it is always difficult to lose a loved one, a respected and loved colleague, friend, or family member, but I think we can all draw inspiration from the incredible accomplishments of their lives, and that is what this session is all about. It's an opportunity for us to all draw inspiration and to celebrate the lives of our loved ones. So again, on behalf of the 10th Judicial District, I welcome all of you.
Now I'll turn the proceedings over to Brian Oaten, the chair of the Memorials Committee.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Oaten. I'm the chair of the Memorials Committee, and on behalf of the committee, I want to thank you all for joining us here today. The Wake County Bar is a special place, and I've heard a lot of people say that, and I'm happy to say that I've observed that a number of times. There's a sense of community here in Wake County, and there's an undercurrent of respect and collegiality. And these special sessions are one of the primary contributors to that community. They're integral to the fabric of our bar. And this is our opportunity to stop and remember these individuals that made a difference both in the community and our personal lives. I always walk away from these sessions feeling encouraged and inspired about our profession and about our community. And I hope that is your experience as well today. To that end, I want to express our sincere thanks to the families of our honorees for joining us today and allowing us as a local bar to recognize their loved ones in this manner. Now, for those of you that have previously attended these special sessions of Superior Court, my words will sound familiar, but I do believe they bear repeating. Today we gather not to mourn, but to remember 6 incredible members of our legal community, to honor their contributions to our profession, perhaps even share a laugh with a funny memory, or maybe learn something new about an individual that we knew for quite some time. But most importantly, we gather to reflect upon and be inspired by the tremendous impact that these individuals had, not only on our professional lives, but our personal lives as well. Now with that, our first honoree is Max Boxley. Mr. Boxley will be presented by Wade Smith.
Thank you so much for those words and for giving me an opportunity to speak on behalf of one of the great friends of my life. I am happy to be at this ceremony, and I want to say to all the families represented here that you have our appreciation for coming and my admiration for your loved ones. I would have known all of them. I have the honor today to speak about Mac Boxley. I admired him so much. I knew him so well. I admired him greatly for his love of family and for the way he loved his profession and for his love of his community. The great love of his life was Mary. She's here. And he adored his daughters, Elizabeth and Emily. And he loved his son-in-law, Chris, and his grandchildren, John, Mac, and Claire. And I have no doubt that the most important things about Mac and the things that he loved the most, it was his family. They meant the most to him. He was first and foremost a family man. He was born on February 2nd, 1942 in Raleigh. He attended Ravenscroft, then Daniels, and finally he attended Broughton, where he graduated in 1960. He was the quarterback on the football team. He was a terrific athlete all of his life, and he was a member of the Broughton High School Athletic Hall of Fame. Mac graduated from UNC Chapel Hill in 1964 and then graduated from the law school in 67. He was a terrific lawyer. I think of him first, as I said, as a family man, but second, I think of him as a great lawyer devoted to his clients. He loved his profession, and he was a favorite of his fellow lawyers. In appreciation of his legal skills, in 2009, Mac was inducted into the North Carolina Bar Association's General Practice Hall of Fame. He was a committed and devoted churchman. This was a huge part of his life. In addition to that, he was deeply committed to his community, and his good works in the church and his good works in his community are legendary. So many great things he did. I knew Mac as a devoted family man, and as a wonderful lawyer, and as a committed member of his church. But I loved Mac for his humanity, for his sense of humor. Each year at Christmas, for many, many years, I took my entire family, children and grandchildren, all of them, to Mac and Mary's house. And we would sing Christmas carols. And we would feast on the beautiful food that Mary and her children fixed. We sang all the great songs, and we always ended with the great old folk song, If I Had a Hammer. I will always remember those days. These were high times and great days. Children with glowing, happy faces. A chocolate fountain of which Mac was proud. And a great fire tended lovingly by Mac. We are left to wonder, I know all of us, where these days went and why they ended so soon. And what is time? That it can slip through our fingers so swiftly. We cherish Mac's life and our memories of him. He will be remembered forever and loved forever. We are grateful for this opportunity that you've given us to stop our many busy things we're doing and remember this amazing man, Mac Boxley, and to give thanks for his life and for the lives of all the people that we celebrate today. Thank you so much.
Our next honoree is Robert Morris Clay. Mr. Clay will be presented by Donna Rutala.
Good afternoon. I'm Donna Rutala, and I'm one of Bob Clay's law partners and friends. I'm here today with Bob's wife, Marie, his son, Rob, and his daughter, Melissa. I had the good fortune of practicing law with Bob for nearly 30 years, and Bob in many ways became a father to me. It is my great honor and privilege to be here today to tell you a little bit about the man I loved. As many of you know, Bob Clay was an incredible trial lawyer. There's no question about that. But more importantly, Bob Clay was an incredible man. He was the classic and charming Southern gentleman with that silver white hair and that twinkle in his eye, and he always knew just the right thing to say and the right thing to do. He was a good and fair man and prided himself always in being fair. Those of us who worked with Bob respected and appreciated his goodness. Just a little bit about his background. Bob was born to parents in North Carolina who were tobacco farmers or worked on the farm, and at age 7 he came to Raleigh, and there he grew up and graduated from Hugh Morrison High School. After he graduated from high school, he went on to UNC and was a double Tar Heel. He not only did his undergraduate, but his law degree there in 1961. And he was a Tar Heel through and through. He, died in the wool Tar Heel, loved watching Tar Heel basketball, loved watching Tar Heel football, and loved sharing that experience with family and friends. Along the way, he met the love of his life, Marie, and they had 2 lovely children, Rob and Melissa. He had a grandson, Zach, and he has 2 great-grandchildren that he just absolutely adored. They had him wrapped around their fingers. After law school, Bob joined the law firm of Teague, Johnson, and Patterson and spent many, many years practicing with his close friends Ron Dilthey and Grady Patterson in various iterations of that law firm. Bob cherished his times with Ron and Bob. He spent the last 10 years of his life with another great law firm at Young, Moore and Henderson. He finally took down that shingle in December of 2017 after practicing law for 56 great years. Bob loved the law, and he loved being a lawyer. As I've already stated, Bob was quite the trial lawyer, and at an early age became very successful in the courtroom. Everyone wanted Bob Clay to be their lawyer. In fact, Bob became kind of the guru of medical malpractice defense work. He represented doctors, nurses, hospitals, all of those who were sued for alleged medical negligence. He also represented doctors and nurses in front of their boards. I recall like yesterday trying cases with Bob, and he was referred to as the Silver Fox. That was his nickname, because not only of his silver white hair that he had, but his incredible ability to outwit and outmaneuver others in the courtroom. He could dismember an expert witness opposing him with a smile on his face and just a lift of his eyebrow. And the expert never knew it happened. It was fascinating to watch and learn by Bob. Another trial lawyer and friend called him Spider-Man. And he called him Spider-Man because of the tangled webs he would weave and traps he could set during trials. Learning from Bob was learning from the best. When Bob left us last year, I can't begin to tell you the people who came up to me and said, I have this story about Bob Clay. And there was a theme after it was all said and done. And the theme was, it was clear that Bob was the person folks called when they needed him. They called when they needed help with a particular legal issue that they had never encountered, but they knew Bob Clay would know it, and they knew he would give them advice. They called Bob Clay when they were in the middle of a trial, and at the end of the day, they were trying to figure out their strategy for the next day because there was some new evidence had been presented, and they didn't know how to handle it, or they had a ruling that they didn't know how to handle. And they would call Bob Clay to say, hey, Bob, what do you think? And Bob, no matter the hour or the time of the day, would take the time to listen and to help. Bob was one of those folks that people called when they had problems with their clients and they didn't know what to do. So they'd call the wise one and say, Bob, what do we do? What do I do here? And on more than one occasion, I heard him counsel other lawyers about how to best handle their situations and how to best write a letter or do whatever they needed to do. And oftentimes, he would actually draft a letter for them. And it was incredible because he was such an eloquent writer. Not only was he a great orator, but he had the ability to write. Bob was one of those people that people called him when they were before the medical board and didn't know what to do. And Bob was the person who would patiently help them figure out what to do next. But Bob was also that person who was first to call a colleague when he found out that they were in trouble or they needed help or they had had a bad day in court or just needed a friend. He would reach out and call. After Bob left us last year, a friend sent me an email that I think kind of summed up Bob. He said Bob was a gifted trial lawyer who taught all of us who had cases with him to be better lawyers. He always seemed to be the most prepared lawyer in all of his trials. It was obvious that he often knew the medicine better than most of the experts that he examined. His professionalism made him a lawyer's lawyer, who we all strove to emulate. He will be missed. In preparing for today, I was thinking about all the lessons that I've learned over the years from Bob Clay, and there were plenty. Let me tell you, after 30 years almost of being with him, I can't tell you all the lessons he taught me. But you know, when I was thinking about what I wanted to say to you so that you would know what meant the most to me, was how Bob made you feel when you were with him. Bob was one of those people who had a specialness about him. No matter who he met, everyone walked away feeling special. Maya Angelou once said that I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how they made you feel. No words could be better spoken about our friend Bob Clay. He made everyone in his pathway feel special. Notably, and this is a wonderful example of just that, Bob had a trial once, and after the trial, the verdict came back, and he had won. His doctor had been exonerated, and the plaintiff that was sitting there was a lady that had come to know Bob over the past couple of years through her deposition and at trial. And after the verdict was read, she notably should be upset because she had just lost. But instead, she came up to Bob and said, "Mr. Clay, may I hug you?" And he turned to her and he said, "Sure." And she gave him this big hug and said, "I just want to tell you thank you because I finally understood what happened. And now I just want to tell you how much that means to me." So she's sitting there on the other side of the case who had just lost this case she had been in for 2 years, and she hugged Bob Clay's neck because he treated her with such respect and such kindness. It speaks volumes, and it could only happen to Bob. Other brief lessons that we learned from Bob along the way, that family always comes first. It's the first thing he'd say to you as a young lawyer, your family comes first. At the end of the day, we'd be there working long hours, and he'd look at me and he'd say, "Dee, go home. Go home, your family needs you." And he meant it. He said, "This will be here tomorrow." Second lesson, always, no matter what, do the right thing. Always. Bob always tried to do the right thing, and he taught all the people who worked with him to do that. Specifically, I recall a case when I was a very young lawyer where Bob had been became sick and asked for a continuance of a trial. The attorney on the other side of the case could not agree to the continuance because he said his client just could not do that. So we didn't get the continuance, and years later, that same attorney who had asked for a continuance called Bob up. We were in a case together, and he said, "Bob," he said, "my daughter's getting married during that trial we have coming up." He said, "Will you agree to a continuance?" Bob didn't hesitate. He said, "Of course I'll agree." He said, "We'll move that case right off the calendar if the judge will do it, and we'll do it whenever it's good for you." I reminded him, because I was a young lawyer, and I said, "Remember what he did last year to us?" And he looked at me and he said, "Dee," he said, "you always do the right thing. You don't care what other people do. You always do the right thing." And he meant it, and he was strong in that. And he said to me, he said, "Don't you ever forget that, because that will keep you strong throughout your career." And he meant that with every young lawyer that he dealt with. He told them to always do the right thing. And lawyers, as you know, from time to time are given the chance to sit and decide what the right thing is to do. And his words are always in my brain, "Dee, always do the right thing." Bob also appreciated loyalty and respect. He always had an open door and had the backs of anyone he worked with. He would sit there and let people line up outside his door when they wanted to talk to him about their medical problems. He didn't care. He always had an open door. They could come and go. And I never could figure out how he got his work done, because people were always in his office asking them about their dad's illness or their mama's illness and what he could do to help. And he always was there to help. And he was always the one who would go to their office the next day and say, "Hey, how's your mom doing?" or "How's your dad doing?" Bob excelled as a trial lawyer, but he also gave back to the community, whether it's through his church or through bar associations or other organizations. Through the bar, he was a member of the North Carolina General Statutes Commission, the Commission on Administration of Justice, past chair of the Subcommittee for the Merit Selection of Judges, the Wake County Bar Board of Directors, and the list goes on. Bob Clay loved the law, and he loved being a lawyer. He was recognized for his accomplishments with the American College of Trial Lawyers and was inducted many, many years ago. He also received numerous accolades and numerous honors over the years. As the years passed away and Bob started slowing down and it was getting time for him to retire, We used to sit and talk for 30, 40 minutes a day and just talk about things that we had done over the years. And I so cherish those memories and those conversations. But Bob Clay would tell anyone who asked what he liked most about practicing law wasn't the honors and the accolades he had won. It wasn't the trials that he had won in, but it was the young lawyers that he had mentored over the years who had grown into successful lawyers, and that gave him the most satisfaction. There are lawyers in many parts of the state today and all over that were mentored by Bob Clay. His impact on those who knew him is immeasurable. Thank you.
Our next honoree is James J. Coman, and he'll be presented by Bill Farrell.
My name is Bill Farrell, and I first met Jim in 1985. Never seen him before, never heard of him, until Judge Thornburg, who had just won election as the Attorney General, brought him to Raleigh to serve as special deputy in charge of the Special Prosecutions Division, of which I was a member. Didn't know much, really didn't know anything about Jim, other than I knew when Judge Thornburg appointed him, a bunch of his buddies on the Superior Court bench must have seen Jim tried and had put either approved or put Jim's name in the hat for the position. But in any event, when he came, very first day, typical Jim, he introduces himself and he says, "We're going to all go out to lunch today." We went out to lunch, and I'm a rather quiet individual, and I just sat there and listened to what went on. And he went around the table, and he was the gregarious Jim that we all know, full of life, full of mouth, full of some salty language, which I'm going to refer to as colorful language. And everybody has heard that colorful language if you met with Jim. I mean, he must have taken lessons from a first sergeant in the Army. He served a couple of years before he went to law school. And believe it or not, favorite tidbit, what was Jim trained at in the Army? He was trained as a door gunner on a Huey helicopter. But as fate has it, Sergeant came in one morning and said, "Is anybody here college graduate?" Jim and another guy raised their hands, and ultimately they were taken out of that particular room and done something else. Fortunately for all of us, fortunately for Jim. But in any event, had that lunch, and I'll go ahead and tell this now because I've got to tell it. Y'all have heard it before, but Jim and I went for about a year, and we got a case ready to try in Cumberland County. And we had a procedure. We'd go to the same eating place on Monday night, Tuesday night. This trial went on for 12 weeks. I'd never been in a trial that long. Jim had already participated in one of the highest profile cases in North Carolina when he got to the Attorney General's office, and that was, y'all remember, it goes back 40 years to this month. It's known now as the Greensboro Massacre. In the early days, it was known as the Klan versus the Communist Workers' Party. 5 individuals were killed, about 11 people wounded, just a horrendous, horrendous event. Jim never talked about it too much, but I do remember one thing he did say about it because I'd gotten to know Jim over this year. Jim had an intense devotion to see that justice was done. I have never seen anybody with the intensity which he presented his cases. He was always totally prepared. He was detailed, and of course that helped him in an immense number of ways. When it came to jury argument, when it came to opening statements, he was just immensely prepared. But he mentioned that one time. He said, "You don't know how long it took for me to sit through 36 not guilty verdicts. The Klansmen were acquitted, and Jim was part of that prosecution team, very early in his legal career. But he participated in that with Rick Greason and the elected district attorney. But anyway, getting back to where I was, and I sort of learned this from Jim. Jim could digress as good as anybody I have ever seen. But once he finished the digression, he was right back on where he left off. I mean, it was uncanny. But in any event, we were out to dinner, and a usual work day in that trial, in any trial with Jim, was go to court, take a couple hours off at the end of the day for dinner recess, go back to the motel room, prepare 2 or 3 hours. And that was it every day. And we did that with him for 12 weeks. But in any event, we're out eating dinner one night, and things sort of stopped. I don't know what, he just sort of leaned forward over there and looked at me. He says, "I need to tell you something." I'm thinking, well, you know, what's this got all serious about? You need to tell me. He looked over there and he says, "Do you remember that first day in the office?" And I said, "Well, sure I do." He said, "We went out to lunch." He said, "Yeah." You know what I decided after that lunch was over with? Now, think of your colorful language at this point. He said, I thought you were a, and it sort of puzzled me, because, we got along fine after that. We'd come back to the office. He assigned cases to me. We talked about stuff. But he said, "You were an," and I didn't think any more about it. And he says, "But I just want you to know, you're all right." To me, that was all. I mean, I look around and I see a lot of Jim's friends in here, and I think of stories when I see them. But to me, that was my validation, almost like being knighted. I was Jim's friend, and let me tell you, Jim was my friend, and he was always going to be remembered as my friend. And we went down a lot of tough roads together in some of these cases. But in any event, I got to talk about Jim's accomplishments before I get back to the stories. And if I have time, I'll get back to some of the stories, but I have got to get to his accomplishments. But Jim, get this. I don't know, Mr. Smith might know some people that have been awarded the Order of the Longleaf Pine 3 times. Jim got that award 3 times. He got one from Governor Martin. He got for his work for victims' rights. And Jim was in the victims' rights movement long before we got to the Attorney General's office. And I've spoken with some of the people in Greensboro from Guilford County during his time up there as the initial police attorney for Greensboro, and also in the DA's office. The victims' rights people up there loved Jim. There ain't no doubt about it. They just loved him and for what he did. And Governor Martin awarded him for his exemplary service for victims' rights. I think it was in 1992. But get this, shortly thereafter, 93 or 4, Governor Hunt, a Democrat, awarded Jim a second Order of the Longleaf Pine, which was all recognized as the top award the governor can give a civilian in the state. And he got a 3rd award for 30 years of dutiful service to the state of North Carolina as a prosecutor. And those awards meant a lot to Jim, and they meant a lot to me, because it was just a recognition of what Jim was. And he was my colorful language, he was a kick-ass prosecutor. He was a tough-as-nails prosecutor. But as I was listening to the last presentation about Mr. Clay, who I didn't know much about, some of the things that were said about Mr. Clay, you could put Jim Coman's name in there. You could put his name, you could just insert Jim Coman's name in there. And it's amazing to me how much they were like being on different fields of the law. But I think the award that Jim was most proud of, and he didn't boast. You tell me if you ever heard Jim Coman boast about anything. But I think the award he was most proud of was the Peter Gilchrist Wade Smith Award, which is given by the criminal justice section of the Bar Association, not the State Bar, but the Bar Association, which is awarded to the prosecutor and the defense attorney who most exemplify the ideals of the legal profession. And I can't think of any two better people than Jim and Wade Smith to be the initial recipients of that award. It says everything about it. Jim was very proud of that. As I saw Tommy Manning, another friend of Jim's, when I walked in, I was telling Tommy, I said, I was looking at that stuff about the recipients of the Peter Gilchrist Award, who was the 36-year DA up in Mecklenburg County, Charlotte. I said, I saw your name on there. And I saw Colan's name on the side of the prosecutor. And I saw Bill Kernley. And I said, Tommy. And I said, Wade's name, Joe Cheshire. Jim was, let me just say this, in my humble opinion, Jim was in some mighty select company to be in that group of recipients, a mighty select group. When I come in and I see all these people here that knew Jim, the stories come to mind, and I can't help it. They just do. And I was asking Wade Smith when he came in, I said, Wade, do you remember this? I said, do you remember speaking at Jim's retirement? Oh, yeah, I do. I said, well, you stole a couple of my lines from me. He says, and I said, but do you remember your story you told about Jim visiting in his office one day? He said, about the lawyer up in the western part of the state and got in a little trouble with some drugs or something? I said, oh, yeah, that's the one. He said, oh, yeah, I remember that well. Said, he went to see Jim, got in Jim's office, and Wade started his usual routine. And he knew Jim. They liked one another. They were friends, but he started the schmooze thing that you usually get. It went on for a while till Jim patiently waited for Wade to finish. Well, Wade finished. Jim, as I remember, I might be using the wrong word, but erupted with his colorful language. Not because he was mad with Jim, but he said, what in the colorful language was your guy thinking about? And, of course, Wade, went on, and Jim went back. Wade said, I learned two things that day. And I picked up on that later on in my career, and I want to tell another story about that. But he said, I learned one thing that day. You could not out-talk Jim Coman. And you could not get the last word. Well, as to everybody that I knew except for his lovely wife, Tricia, which I think she did get the last word a time or two. That was true. It was true of me. It was true of me. Jim got the last word. Even though we jointly tried cases together, Jim got the last word. But in any event, we were down in Duplin County, as I recall, trying a murder case. Right now, I don't know why we had that murder case, but we did. And we go down there, and Jim picks a jury, and evidence starts. And when the evidence started, one of the defense counsel started making objections. And after every objection, I don't care what it was about, whether it's hearsay or not relevant or whatever, they would say, and on the basis of the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 8th, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Jim, I looked one another. So anyway, well, this goes on forever how long the state presented its case, which was, I'm telling you, every time he said it, it became like a Gregorian chant to me. It got old. Well, anyway, we finished our case, and the judge takes lunch recess, and he says, I'll hear motions when we get back. And of course, we all knew it was going to be a motion to dismiss. So we get back from lunch, and I walk by defense counsel's table, and I look down there, and lo and behold, there's a 15A open, which I think to the right thing about making motions and whatever. So I look, and he's got a couple of Supreme Court reporters over there that got marked. So anyway, we get back over to our counsel table, and I lean over to Jim. I said, I don't think we're going to hear the chant. said, what do you mean? I said, well, he's got a 15A over there. He's got a couple of court reporters. And I said, I don't think he's going to do the chant. Jim said, he will. He will. He will. He's done it all, all week. I said, well, I just think you're wrong this time, Jim. Well, Jim's back and forth a little bit. He says, I'll just bet you. I said, well, call the bet. Tell me what you want to bet. I said, I'm saying he's not going to say it, and you're saying he is going to say it. So, judge recognizes defense counsel to make his motions. Well, Your Honor, I'm making a motion to dismiss. And he cites the applicable statutes, cites a couple of cases, and sits down. We don't hear the chant. The chant is not made. It's not on the basis of this or that and the other. It's what he said. So I look over at Jim. I may have smirked, I don't know, but I certainly might have grinned a little bit, I got you this time, big boy. So the judge says, does the state wish to be heard? And Jim rises slowly, looks at the trial judge, looks down at me, and says, Your Honor, I don't understand the basis of this motion to dismiss. Well, it was like a cattle prod had been put into defense counsel. He jumped to his feet and he blurted out, it's based on the 4th, the 5th. And we heard the chant. Well, Mr. Coman, as he can be, looks at me down there and he gives me a nod. He gives me, nothing untoward, but he just gives me a nod. I know what I'm talking about. What I learned from that is what Mr. Wade Smith learned. You can't out-talk him. And he's going to get the last word. That was always been a case that we always liked to talk about in a friendly kind of way. But in any event, how am I doing on time? Good right now. I've been given specific instructions by Mr. Oden. But after 8 years in the Attorney General's office and as head of the Special Prosecution or Criminal Division at that time, Judge Thornburg had reorganized a bunch of the sections in the office, and Jim was, in addition to trying these cases that we tried, he had supervisory responsibility for about 70 lawyers. And I can tell you, supervising 70 lawyers is sort of like herding cats. But anyway, Jim was good at it. And the staff loved Jim. And they loved Jim because he was a leader and because he stood behind them. They always knew that Jim was going to take care of them. And Jim cared about everybody. He cared about his friends. He cares about law enforcement officers, the bureau agents. I'm telling you, they adored him. They adored him because he stood up for them, he worked for them, and he told it, as they say, he told it like it was. And if y'all dealt with him, you know that he did. But he raised the morale out at the bureau when he was out there from 1993 to about 1999, and he came back to the Attorney General's office. We didn't try any more cases together after 1993 because we were in different divisions. But Jim made so many contributions to the legal profession. He made so many contributions to the Attorney General's office. I mean, Jim had the respect of the judiciary because of his professionalism and because of the honesty and integrity that exuded from every pore of his body. Judge Thornburg affectionately called him his junkyard dog. He had several nicknames. Sometimes he was called the junkyard dog. Sometimes he was called the pit bull. But everybody knew what it meant. Wade, on the occasion that he visited Jim, made note of two things. There was a round saw, gold about this like, which represented a buzz saw, which was presented to him by the Guilford County Bar or District Attorney up there when he left up there. And the second thing right beside the buzzsaw was the duty of a prosecutor, which Jim lived every day of his life, which was not to convict, but was to do justice, find out what the truth was and to do justice. and to do the right thing. I go around anybody, how many times have we heard, all you had to do was do the right thing? As long as you did the right thing and tried to do the right thing, Jim Coman is going to back you 100%. And finally, I just want to recognize Tricia Coman, love of Jim's life. Kimberly over there, that's just a chip off the old block, his daughter. I was proud of her at her father's funeral, the eulogy that she gave to him. It's one of the most moving ones I've ever heard. He loved you all. I thought I saw, I see Frank and he loved his brothers. He loved his granddaughters, and one of the things about the granddaughter was she used to like to go to Papa's house on Saturday night so she'd get up and go to church with him on Sunday morning and go eat brunch. And one of the things Jim was proud of, and I had left the AG's office by this time, and Jim was getting ready to retire, had retired, was served on the nominating committee for the pastor at the church he attended. He worked hard on that. He was very proud of that. And I just want to say in conclusion, Jim will be remembered for a lot of things, but I remember him as my friend forever. Thank you.
Our next honoree, Timothy Scott Hovis Gobern, and Mr. Gobern be represented by Deborah.
Well, good afternoon, and I'm here with Ivan Hovis Gobern and several members of the staff at the North Carolina General Assembly to honor Tim's life. I learned a lot about Tim's personal life when I went to a memorial service for him earlier this year in Chapel Hill. And when you're a member of the General Assembly and there are staffers who you work with, it really doesn't happen a lot that you get involved with each other's, know all of your friends and all of your personal lives, because the staffers have to be extremely professional and treat all of the members the same way. I was, however, very fortunate to get to know him better at the end of his life and get to know Ivan on a much more personal level and can call Tim a friend. But I'm going to talk about how Tim operated at the General Assembly, because he was one of the best. And I got to know him when I was a member of the House and when I chaired a Judiciary Committee. But let me tell you, we have a lot of different kinds of lawyers here, but being a staff attorney at the General Assembly is not an easy job. You have 170 bosses. Many of them don't like each other, and you are doing the ultimate public service for the state and leaving a legacy of laws that everybody else is going to have to follow. But Tim was exceptional at his job, and he fulfilled some of the unusual requirements of a staffer at the General Assembly. He worked very long and very unpredictable hours. My heart goes out to the folks who are at this longest session of the General Assembly for doing that. He took every request from a member seriously. And you have to remember, a lot of these members are like some of the clients whose cases you don't take. But you have to see them all day, every day, and you have to take them all seriously. He also treated everyone with respect, even though many of the staffers at the General Assembly are not treated with the same respect by members and lobbyists. But Tim always was respectful. And Tim had to keep secrets, because the staffers have to adhere to legislative confidentiality, just like a lawyer does with confidentiality to your client. But he had it doubly hard, because he was ethics counsel as well at the General Assembly. He was diplomatic and you have to be that at the General Assembly, and he was always professional. And his colleagues have told me, because I talked to a few of them in preparing, that just like some of the gentlemen we've heard about today, he was a lawyer's lawyer at the General Assembly. He had a cool, calm demeanor, and he had a gift for explaining the law in layman's terms, because most of the people you work for are not lawyers. I worked with him very closely when I chaired the Judiciary I Committee. We had 4 lawyers on the staff, and Tim was the chief lawyer who managed all other 3 attorneys. He also managed the docket of all the bills that were referred to our committee. And our committee was a committee that was supposed to hear a lot of bills, and it was a committee that was supposed to not hear a lot of bills. And so frequently the staffers would be pushed by the members about why their bills weren't being heard. And Tim was always a gentleman and always gracious and always sent them to me. But we did let a few bills through that nobody thought would get through. And I remember there was a bill that came through. There was a member, he had formerly been a senator, then he was a House member, and he never got his bills through committee. And he had a good idea. And I said we were going to let his bill come through the committee as long as he was willing to do multiple drafts and worked with the stakeholders. And Tim was so patient with him. His bill made it to the floor, and when it passed, the member got a standing ovation. But a lot of it was due to Tim's good nature and his willingness to work with the members. The Senate, however, did not pass the bill, so just to let you know. But Tim lived through the drafts. He made sure everything was ready before it went to the floor. He managed his team like a small law firm, and they worked and handled so many complicated issues and matters, but they did everything with discretion and with the highest level of legal expertise. Everything that came out of our committee that he touched was excellent, and this added up to having better laws for the state of North Carolina. Now, I talked to some of his colleagues, and they shared with me what Tim was like in his office and working with his colleagues. And at the legislature, teamwork is crucial, and he was very much a team player. His colleagues in the research division became his family, and he mentored several of the younger attorneys. But he was also, like I said earlier, cool, calm, and collected. And when there was an emergency and there was a deadline, frequently people would go to Tim for his sage guidance and his ability to deal with things under pressure. I'd like the folks who work at the General Assembly to just stand up, because I want to thank them for being here and being with Tim, and I'd like you to see them, some of our wonderful public servants. Thank you so much. They also told me that he never let the stress of the job get to him, and that he was known for being the person who could always make people laugh, sometimes uncontrollably. And I spoke with one of the former staffers, and she said sometimes when she was in a meeting with Tim, she would just start to bust up laughing and couldn't stop. And you need that kind of sense of humor to deal with the stress in the long days. They would consult with him, they would collaborate with him, and they would always seek his advice. After Tim left the General Assembly, I got to know him and Ivan a lot better, saw them at social events, and they had been very, very supportive of me, and they became very, very good friends. But like I said at the beginning, Tim left us much, much too soon. He made the state and the state of the law better for his service. He did it with grace, professionalism, and great good humor. We'll all miss him very dearly.
Brian, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about a dear friend. My name is Tom Whitaker, and I had the pleasure of being here at the Wake County Bar for a little over 38 years before I left for a smaller community and a lot quieter community. But during that time, I had the pleasure of hiring a number of attorneys to work for what was then the Employment Security Commission, state agency. And Thelma was one of the unique hires that we had. Thelma had a life of challenges. She loved challenges, and she had plenty of them. At an early age, she was asked to leave her home and live with an aunt who was disabled, could not walk, and to be the caregiver for that aunt from a small age until she left for college. And she did it without complaint and never had a cross word to say about growing up with that aunt who she loved. The aunt's house was near a railroad track. They didn't have a car. So in high school and early in college, when she was still at home, she found jobs within a walking distance and would walk the railroad tracks to find those jobs. And she recruited neighbors to come in to look after her aunt while she was working, without any complaints. She graduated with honors from her high school. She attended a community college first, honors from Shaw University, and then went on to the University of North Carolina Law School, all without transportation. The year she graduated from Carolina, she was referred to us as an outstanding applicant. And she was introduced to me as someone who would never say no to a challenge and would find a way to accomplish any task the state asked her to do. I thought, wow, that's an amazing recommendation. I met her, I agreed, and I said, we have an opening in Greenville. She said, no problem. I didn't know she didn't have a car. I didn't know she didn't have a driver's license. I guess the statute of limitations run on that one. But between the time we hired her 1 week and she reported the next week, she taught herself over to Kmart parking lot in a friend's car to drive and bought her first new car. People in Greenville loved her, soon promoted her, and she became the public spokesperson for the Employment Security Commission in Eastern North Carolina. She didn't stay there long. She came to Raleigh shortly after that and started her long career here in Wake County. From an appeals judge in Greenville to all of the legal positions in the Employment Security Commission, Thelma exceeded at each and every one. She worked as an unemployment insurance appeals judge, a staff attorney, senior attorney, appeals deputy commissioner, chief deputy commissioner, attorney supervisor, and deputy chief counsel. All positions with more responsibility. She never did take care of a car, and that was not part of something that she thought was important. She was at a meeting one time in Wilmington. The car gave out, stopped working. She walked over to the Chevrolet dealership and said, what kind of trade-in would you give me for that car over in the parking lot? You can see it. And they said, oh, we'd give you, she said, fine. She bought her a new car. They said, you going to bring the car over here? She said, no, it won't run. She had her transportation back to Raleigh. She was okay. She solved that problem and many others. She asked for the toughest work that we had from the very beginning. One of the few that would say, what's the toughest work you have? What's the most complex work you have? And then that she would take it on and do a tremendous job with each and every case she had. The first time she appeared in the Court of Appeals was a year after she started with us. And we went to the room afterwards, and she was asked, well, how do you think it went? She said, well, I think I did pretty good. 2 of the 3 made eye contact, but there's one that just looked down and wouldn't look at me. And do you think it's because of, and she was about to say something, and a colleague said, you know that person's blind, a judge is blind. She said, oh, well, that answers that one. I did great then, you know. And she did. They ruled for the Employment Security Commission. She was happy. She prepared well for every case, every challenge. We were a federally funded state agency and had many contacts with the U.S. Department of Labor over the years. She wanted all of those assignments. She particularly liked arguing with federal officials. She liked arguing with anyone, but she especially liked that. She was admitted to all the appellate courts in North Carolina, practiced there regularly, all the federal courts. The one case that I remember the most is that at one time the Employment Security Commission had to inspect migrant housing that farmers were offering for migrant crews that were going to come from Mexico. And we ended up with a lawsuit in Brownsville, Texas, right across the river from Matamoros, Mexico. And she, of course, volunteered for that and became an expert in military barracks water standards for water heaters and health safety issues. And that took several days, and I wish you could see this picture. This is Thelma and myself when neither one of us had a gray hair in Matamoros, Mexico. And she asked the waiter, said, waiter, what do you want to eat tonight? You know what? She said, I want the hottest thing on the menu. And she was sweating a little bit by the end, but she took that as another challenge and came back and said, I ate in Matamoros, Mexico, and had a great time there. And she did great work in all of the cases that she had. Outside the Employment Security Commission, she operated on the same premise. There was nothing she would not take on, not a challenge she couldn't overcome, not a job she couldn't do in an exceptional manner, and make friends along the way, lifelong friends, who treasured Thelma as a friend. She added friends every day. There was an association of professionals in employment security work in North Carolina and nationally. She became the president of the state chapter and later the president of the national chapter, and then volunteered when she wasn't in office for every difficult assignment they would ask, and they called often. As you can imagine, if somebody would volunteer to do the difficult task, how many telephone calls she received for drafting minutes, drafting rules, regulations, and traveling to unpopular places. There was an Association of Workforce Professionals. She joined that, became president of the state chapter, president of the international chapter, and served in various offices. There was the National Association of State Unemployment Insurance Judges. You know what? She was president of that group from the representatives of the 50 states. I can tell you that she was a dear friend of mine. Colleagues from Employment Security miss her. I miss her. Life was a joy to have her in the office, in your car when we were traveling, or in a case. You knew she was prepared. She told me she wanted to live life to the fullest. She left early. We miss her greatly. But she did not miss the opportunity when it came to have fun, to work hard, to be prepared, and at the end of the day, she could say, I had a good time and I worked and I have no regrets. She loved life. She loved being an attorney. She loved her Lord. She loved her neighbors as herself, and she always loved a good fight. We miss Thelma Hill. Thank you.
Our final honoree is Diane Cheryl Pomper, and this honor will be presented by Mr. Slipsky.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is my honor and privilege to talk about Diane Pomper. Diane and I worked together for close to 20 years. I think it was probably maybe 18 or 19. And for the last 10 years or so, that relationship, I was her supervisor. Diane had unquestionable integrity. She was just the nicest person you would ever want to meet. I know some of you folks in here actually had dealings with Diane. And I know you would all agree that she was as fair and as polite a person as you would ever care to have on the other side of a case. In fact, sometimes I thought that her empathy went too far. And I'd have to prod her a little bit to get angry at the other side enough so that she put on a good, zealous case. But I would tell people, you know, Diane, she's a Girl Scout. And she was. She was a Girl Scout. She was a Girl Scout leader. But Diane, you know, most of the time in the office environment, you know when someone's the Girl Scout leader because they come to you to sell you cookies. Diane didn't go to you to sell cookies. In fact, you had to kind of twist her arm to sell you some of the darn cookies. She was just that kind of person. She was very giving. I remember we went to schedule a meeting at lunchtime. We thought, well, we'll have a lunch meeting, you know. She says, I can't make it. I said, why not? She says, well, I do Meals on Wheels 2 days a week. I said, how long has that been going on? She says, well, 10 years. I've got to say, you know, as a supervisor, and I was a supervisor a lot, I had a lot of people I supervised, and before I came to the AG's office, I was in the Air Force. I was, initially I flew C-130s, but eventually the Air Force decided that was really unsafe, and they sent me to law school. My mother thought it was much better too. But anyway, I was a supervisor in the Air Force, and I came to the AG's office, and for the first time in many, many years, I didn't supervise anybody but myself. And it was heaven. And then they found out I used to be a supervisor. And they made me one again. I can tell you that if you got to be a supervisor, you want Diane Pomper. Because as most of you, I assume most of you have supervised somebody. You know, you lose sleep worrying about these cases. And you think about the deadlines, and did this get filed? And of course, then you've got that person in your office who always comes to you at the very last moment. They need an extension because they didn't do their work, and you want to pull your hair out. Diane never did that. Diane was the most dependable person. I never worried about her. I could tell you a lot about the kind of cases that she had, and she had a lot. We all had a lot at the AG's office. And it's funny because as I was listening to Mr. Whitaker, I realized I had a case with him. He was my client. And that was sort of true for our whole office. We went everywhere. We basically represented the Department of Health and Human Services, but from time to time, we would be seconded out. Well, Diane, I mean, she was on the same rotation as everyone else, but there's one area I thought I'd tell you about because it was a true service to the state. At this area, we actually did not represent the Department of Health and Human Services. We represented you, the citizens of North Carolina. And some of you know about this. A couple of you know a lot about it, but most of you probably don't. And I'm talking about the adjudication of patients as not guilty by reason of insanity. What happens to those folks after they get adjudicated? Well, they go to a state facility, but it doesn't end there. They have due process hearings. And as I said to Diane when I took over the supervisor job, I said, Diane, you know, we can do a lot of things wrong in this job. We can make a lot of mistakes. It'll probably show up on our performance records, but it won't get us fired. But this will get us fired. If we miss an NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity hearing, if we don't get that scheduled, because we had to do it on the dot, 365 days, we're going to violate the statute. If we let somebody who people will compare to Hannibal Lecter out on the street because we screwed up, we will be fired. And this is very important to me, that Richard Slipsky not be fired. So that is your highest priority, Diane. Well, I've got to tell you, like I said, a lot of people, everyone knows there is a not guilty by reason of insanity thing, but a lot of people don't realize how big or small it is. Well, when I took over the job, I think we had 20 people in the state facilities who've been committed after having been acquitted by reason of insanity. And by the time Diane retired, we had, I think it was 54. And these folks are all over the state. They actually, most of them nowadays are at the forensic unit in Buckner at Central Regional Hospital. But when we first took over, they were at each of the state hospitals, and there were 4 state hospitals at the time. But each individual could, in fact, go back to the home county, and that's typically what happened. The district attorneys would bring the case back to where the offense occurred. That meant Diane, mostly Diane, although I had others helping, was traveling all over the state, almost every county. Now, Diane, I got to say, the other thing about Diane that I thought was interesting was her father was a career General Motors employee, and Diane was loyal. She always had a General Motors car. And I can remember trying to keep up with her Buick. I have a picture of the back end of the Buick. I very rarely saw the front end because she had a lead foot and she could travel in that car. Well, to conclude, and I know I probably have more time, but I think maybe you don't want to stay for the full time. If you want to be a good supervisor, what you need to do is you need to hire people who are self-motivated, who are dependable and effective. So you need to hire Diane Pompers. If you can find folks like that, the whole supervising thing is a piece of cake. I want to recognize her husband, Sandy, is here today, and their daughter, Judith, is with them too. Diane was a great attorney. She was a wonderful colleague, and she was a dear friend.
And that concludes today's program. Thank you to all of our presenters for your thoughtful words and your wonderful shared memories. Thank you to all of the members of our Memorials Committee for all the work that you do in making these special sessions occur and putting these things together. Many thanks to our videographer, Brian Miller of Front Rudder Productions, Charlotte Sharp and Whitney Von Hum of the 10th Judicial District and Wake County Bar. Thank you for your support. To your honor for presiding over these special sessions. Clerk Williams and his staff, thank you so much, and to Mr. Bailiff, and of course to all of you for coming here and joining us for this very special occasion. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Judge Collins.
Thank you very much. I want to give a special thanks to Brian Oden. He is a wonderful chair of our committee, and his exemplary leadership is what puts all this together. He does all the hard work. I just sit here and look good, right? Or not. I've been coming to these services my entire career, as long as I can remember, and I always learn something, leave them sort of feeling uplifted. And today's no different. Thank all of you for participating. Thank all the family members. I hope we'll stick around and just get to know each other a little bit. We're not doing anything else in this courtroom the rest of the day. You're welcome to stay around as long as you would like. But with that, Mr. King, if you would please adjourn this special ceremonial session of the Wake County Superior Court sine die.
Yes, sir. All rise. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes. This Honorable Superior Court for the County of Wake is now adjourned, sine die. God save the state and this honorable court.